Hello, everyone. Welcome to the High on Energy podcast, where we discuss cutting edge functional health strategies to balance your hormones, heal that troubled tummy, and of course, ditch debilitating fatigue so you can get off the couch and finally create a life of excitement and adventure. I'm your host, Kendra Perry, and I can't wait to get you more energy. Let's get started. Hey guys, how's it going? Kendra Perry here. Welcome to another episode of High on Energy TV. As always, I am super excited to be with you today, and I'm super excited, as always, to show you how to get more energy. Yay! And today we're going to be talking about something that, well, as always, I feel pretty passionately about. I feel like I have a lot of opinions, and I'm really glad that you guys want to hang out with me every week and hear my opinions. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about heavy metals, and we're going to be talking about IV chelation, which is typically the standard strategy that a lot of practitioners are going to use if they have determined that you have a heavy metal issue, okay? And so let's talk a little bit first about toxic metals. So toxic metals, you're going to find them on the periodic table, and they're basically just elements in our environment that are very toxic to the human body. So in terms of metals, if we compare them to minerals, you're going to find minerals also on the periodic table, but of course minerals have biological function, they have physiological function, they're actually incredibly important for our bodies to function properly and for us to be healthy and not have sick. And unfortunately, glad you're here. And if you guys have questions, you can definitely ask them in the comments, and I will do my best to get to them at the end of the video or as we go through the video. And basically, metals, they don't have any physiological function. Ellen's here too. Welcome, Ellen. And so with metals in the body, they are going to disrupt the bodily functions, the bodily process, regardless, okay? Even small amounts of metals are still an issue. And, you know, the biggest issue with a lot of heavy metal testing, and I would include hair mineral analysis, my favorite test, in this, is that they have really kind of loosey-goosey reference ranges. And it's crazy how, you know, on a lot of even urine metals or stool metals or hair mineral analysis, like just a little bit of metal will pop up and it looks like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's the very tiny bottom of the reference range. But actually, that's actually a pretty big deal. And that's just because, like I mentioned, there's no physiological function. There's no biological function for metals. So even a small amount getting into your system is going to cause issues. And the primary issues with metals is that they interfere with the cell mitochondria, okay? And the mitochondria is like this little energy powerhouse within your cell. It's responsible for making something called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is your cellular energy. Think of it like gasoline being put into the car. The ATP is the gas for your body. So when you don't have ATP, I mean, not only will you not maybe feel energetic or have energy, but like the body doesn't run, right? So if metals are interfering with the mitochondria, this is a huge issue, right? And this is why I think a lot of these tests, HTMA labs included, need to actually do a better job of reporting their reference ranges, because it just makes people think, and I think it gives people a false sense of security. They're like, oh, well, I don't really have many metals, or practitioners are like, oh, it's really low, it's not a big deal. But when even like these, like when I look at hair mineral analysis, even if I see just a little bit of metal popping up, then I'm still going to call that metal toxicity. I'm still going to cause that an issue, okay? And typically, you know, when you get some sort of metals testing and you're found to be metal toxic, or whoever you're working with is like, okay, you have a metal problem, we need to detox metals. If they are a licensed practitioner, if they're a doctor, if they're a naturopathic doctor, typically what they're going to do is they're going to recommend IV chelation, okay? And so chelators are basically synthetic substances that grab metals and pull them out of the body, okay? And, you know, when you first look at that, you're like, oh, well, that sounds really good. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to grab these metals and I want to move them out of the body. But unfortunately, when these chelators pull metals out of the body, they end up recirculating the body several times, and so they pull these metals through the kidneys. And that in itself is very, very incredibly hard on the kidneys, okay? And it can actually be dangerous, and it tends to cause a lot of symptoms. If you Google symptoms of IV chelation online, or, you get on some forums, you listen to some people who've gone through this experience, you may not hear a lot of good recommendations or good stories around it. And there's a lot of people who swear, and I tend to believe them, that they totally lost their health, or their health totally went sideways after a chelation treatment. My father is actually one of those people. This was many, many years ago, and I mean, I don't ever think there's one thing that causes everything, but I think this was a trigger for him. Because, he had some stuff going on, and he was recommended to do some chelation therapy. And within a couple days of getting chelation therapy, he got a really, so I would say, like, in terms of chelation therapy, you got to be in a really strong place to even consider taking it. I would highly recommend that you do it alongside mineral balancing. I don't think you should ever do it by itself, just chelation. And I think the thing that we really have to consider is the source of the metals, okay? And so, any metal detox really does begin with determining, well, where are these metals actually coming from, okay? So I looked at a couple hair mineral analysis panels today. It's actually a husband-wife team that I'm working with. We're awesome, and both of them have aluminum through the roof, like off the charts, like way outside the reference range, like almost like just super high. And it's like, it's really concerning. And I'm like, okay. So the first thing we do when I look at that is I'm like, okay, like we need to figure out where that aluminum has actually come from. So I go through their intake. I study their intake. When I talk with them in a session, I pull up all the sources and we talk about it. I'm like, is this in it? Because, these things can be hiding in your environment. And what we actually determined, well, first of all, they had both just recently quit smoking cigarettes, like as of December. So they've only been off cigarettes for about a month. So unfortunately, cigarettes are full of synthetic chemicals. They're full of metals. They're full of cadmium. And aluminum is a very common filler in a lot of cigarettes. So as soon as I knew that information, I was like, okay. So cigarettes is definitely part of it, and luckily they quit smoking, so this is really good. Okay, so we've dealt with that. The other thing that came to mind with the aluminum was the fact that they eat out a lot. And almost all restaurants actually cook with aluminum because it's much cheaper than stainless steel, and that aluminum readily leaches into food. So if you're someone who eats out at a lot of restaurants, then that is definitely an issue. And you're going to be consuming high levels of aluminum. So it's too bad, because eating out is nice, but if you do it all the time, you're going to not only have an issue with aluminum, but probably many other issues as well. Okay. So once you determine, okay, and we can't, it is impossible to remove all sources of metals, unfortunately, like they are all around us. Like if you just like look at this room, like there's probably toxic metals in the paint. There's probably at some point that couch behind me probably was off-gassing formaldehyde and other chemicals, maybe even bromine. Luckily it's a used couch, so hopefully it's not doing those things anymore, okay? But we have a very intimate relationship with chemicals, with metals, so it is impossible to fully remove the sources of all of these things. But we can do a very good job, at least, of removing the major sources, okay? The next approach I would take to heavy metal detox that doesn't involve chelation would be to balance minerals, okay? And you might be wondering, well, what do minerals have to do with metals? And the truth is they have everything to do with metals, okay? And this is because minerals and metals are very similar, okay? They have similar properties. They all sit on the periodic table. They might have different molecular or chemical weights, different valences, different numbers of electrons in their shells. This is getting pretty nerdy with chemistry, but they are similar, okay? And what that means is that if the body's in a pinch, if the body is lacking something that it needs to complete a certain function, and when I talk about lacking, I'm talking about minerals. The body can actually use metals in the place of minerals to perform that specific function. So a really good example is cadmium and lead. Okay, so lead and cadmium have very similar chemical structures, very similar atomic weights. Cadmium will fit into a lot of the binding sites that zinc needs to fit into, but obviously cadmium is incredibly toxic, and it's only going to do a small portion of the jobs that zinc does. But if the body is zinc deficient or it doesn't have bioavailable zinc to work with, then it can use cadmium. If there's cadmium in the body, it can actually use it, okay? There's also a really a similarity between calcium and lead, for example. So these two are very similar. And if the body is lacking calcium, and this would be true in someone who is an excessive or a fast oxidizer, they tend to have very low levels of calcium, and the body can actually use lead to make bone, okay? Because 99% of calcium should be in the bone. And when it's not in the bone, it causes issues. And if it's getting pulled from the bone because it's biounavailable, the body needs to use something to build bone. And it will use lead. Unfortunately, lead makes really crappy brittle bone, but it is better than nothing, okay? Aggressively pull metals out of the kidneys. Why would you want to do that if the body is actually utilizing those metals in place of mineral deficiency? And I think this is how chelation therapy can make people very sick. Not only is chelation pulling metals very aggressively through the kidneys, which is very hard on the kidneys, very hard on the liver, very hard on the body, but it's also pulling them from the body before the body might be ready to eliminate them, because really the body needs to be remineralized. And this is why hair mineral analysis and remineralizing and mineral balancing is so important, because the body will let go of what it doesn't need when you actually give it what it needs, okay? So, for example, like if you are calcium deficient and your body is using lead in place of calcium, then you need to restore your calcium levels. But you can only do that if you actually know your calcium levels and where they're actually at, right? So we do that with hair mineral analysis. And then, maybe the body would love to let go of cadmium, but it doesn't have good zinc levels. So we need to actually make the zinc more bioavailable. And when we do that, we can actually way more easily get the cadmium out of the body. So I always start with hair mineral analysis because you want to make sure the body's in a really strong place. Just because you know something is present in the body, like heavy metal toxicity, doesn't always mean that it is the time to go for it. And sometimes you actually do need to build the body up before the body is actually ready to address and deal with metals, okay? So when it comes to, once you remineralize the body and you're supporting the minerals, and the body has a strong metabolism, is in a stronger energetic state, this could be a good time to start going for metals. And there's a lot of strategies you can do. But even at that point, I still don't recommend IV chelation. I still think it can be sketchy. I still think it can be harmful. So I think at that point, I would use some natural chelators. I'm a big fan of coriander seed oil. I'm a big fan of activated silicon, so BioCell. It's a product that is marketed for hair, skin, and nails, but it's actually a really great heavy metal immobilizer. I love modified citrus pectin as a binder. And when metals, when there are a lot of metals in a person, and I really suspect that they are very high in the body, based on testing, I'll actually do an EDTA suppository. So EDTA is a chelator, but when you insert it rectally, so into the anus, it actually doesn't get pulled through the kidneys 3 times. It only goes through once. So it's much easier on the body, goes straight into the bloodstream, and it really takes a lot of the pressure off of the liver and the kidneys. And as a result, it has very few side effects. People might experience a little bit of fatigue, a little bit of diarrhea, but they don't get the scary and often dangerous side effects that can actually come with IV chelation, okay? And so I think this is really, really important. I think it's, and I see this a lot, and I'm not trying to bash other practitioners that are doing this, but this is what a lot of the research is on. And the reason for this is because our knowledge of heavy metals, like what's in the research, is usually based around workplace or industrial accident exposure. So these more extreme situations where people are working in a mill or a factory and they get exposed to some high dose metal, or some like nuclear disaster, some industrial disaster that leaches some chemical in really high amounts into the environment. In those cases, when you've had a really extreme aggressive exposure to metal, like IV chelation may actually be something that would save your life and something that would be the best course of action. There are certain situations where it's so bad that you need something really strong like that, but IV chelation is not a good strategy for long-term chronic low-grade metal exposure. And that's typically what we're dealing with as people who maybe don't work in factories or aren't getting exposed to these things in high doses as a result of some local disaster. A lot of us have this low-grade chronic metal accumulation and exposure, and really a good strategy is not to go in aggressively and pull these things out of the body, okay? So I always start with, we talk about exposure, like where are these things coming into our life? How can we reduce our exposure as much as possible? Great way to start is to filter your shower water and your tap water, because that's how a lot of us are actually getting exposed to metals. So that is a really good starting point. And then starting to look at your personal care products, your beauty products, starting to look at cookware. What you're eating your food on, what you're cooking your food in. These are all really important things, okay? And then once we've kind of talked about exposure, and obviously when you're addressing exposure and removing these things from your environment, it's not a quick fix. It takes time, and it is sort of it's a process. You know, I'm still years in slowly replacing things and getting certain things out of my life that I know are toxic. And then at that point, that's when it would be a great time to run a hair mineral analysis test. If you're a member of my High on Energy program, my membership program, you can access this test as an upgrade. It's where I start everyone with, because when we remineralize the body will naturally start to let go of some of its metals. And once we get to the body to a strong state, to a place where the energy is strong and the person is feeling much better and feels like they can take on a little bit more, that's when we start to do the stronger metal detox. And that way might be when I do some EDTA suppositories, when I might do more natural chelators. But if you're wondering what is a good sort of like general metals strategy that we can all do on a regular basis to help our body not accumulate some of these toxic metals that we are getting exposed to on a regular basis. And so first would be to do BioSil. So BioSil liquid, like I said, this is marketed towards skin, nails, and hair, but it is a fantastic heavy metal immobilizer. I would only start with 1 drop, and I would not go much further than 6 or 7 drops. It can cause a lot of fatigue, especially if you are someone who has a lot of metals in their body. But you would never take this without taking a binder, and the only binder I recommend is Econogenics Pectosil C. This is modified citrus pectin. This company has backed up their process with many studies, many scientific trials, and the reason I like it is because modified citrus pectin will bind to metals, it'll bind to chemicals, it'll bind to all the crap, but it will not bind to minerals. And that is a huge downfall of many binders out there, is they bind to everything. And in a society where we are incredibly mineral deficient, where we are dealing with a mineral and nutrient poor food supply, we don't want to be taking anything that's going to make that situation worse for us. And that's why I only recommend the modified citrus pectin. If you're going to do something like charcoal or bentonite clay, I recommend rotating it. So only doing it for maybe 3 or 4 days and then taking a couple weeks off, just because it is going to have a pretty significant effect on binding to your minerals. Okay. So I hope that was helpful, guys. And if you're on with me for Facebook Live, so I do this Facebook Live every Tuesday at 4:15 Pacific time. If you guys want to hop on with me live, and then this episode actually goes out as an episode of the High on Energy podcast, and that goes out every Thursday. But if you guys are on Facebook Live with me right now and you have questions, just let me know. I'm always happy to answer your questions. There is a bit of a delay between when I see the question testing. You want to get the answers, and you're sick of guessing what's going on with your energy, what's going on with your health, and you want to actually get a strategy that science tells you is correct. You can work with me in my High on Energy group membership program. Currently, that is the only way to work with me, because I am not taking on one-on-one clients. But members of my group get lots of support from me, and they also get access to the testing. All right, guys, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday for the next High on Energy episode.